The wind came down from the mountains that evening like a drunk man looking for a fight, rattling the tin sheets Ada had nailed over the broken window last week. She paused in her mending, needle halfway through a tear in her work shirt, and listened. Outside, the goats bleated their complaints, and somewhere beyond the fence line, a coyote answered with its lonesome cry. Dry Creek hadn't seen proper rain in 43 days. Ada knew because she'd been marking them on the wall beside her father's old anvil, each scratch a little prayer that tomorrow might bring clouds. The well was holding, barely, but she'd taken to rationing 1 bucket for the goats, 1 for herself, and whatever dregs remained went to the 3 stunted tomato plants she refused to let die. She was contemplating whether to waste lamp oil on finishing the shirt when the first gunshot cracked through the evening air. Ada's hands stilled. Sound carried far in the desert, but this was close, maybe a mile out on the Carson Road. A second shot followed, then nothing but wind. Ada set down her sewing and reached for the Winchester propped beside the door. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, back when his hands were steady and his lungs didn't rattle like dried beans in a jar. A woman alone needs to be twice as careful and 3 times as ready, he'd said. She'd buried him 2 summers back, and the words had proved truer than either of them had imagined. She waited, rifle across her lap, listening. The lamp flame flickered, casting shadows that danced across the rough plank walls. Her little house wasn't much 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was hers, bought with 5 years of washing clothes and mending for the miners before the silver played out. Now she had 6 goats, a vegetable patch that fought her every day, and neighbors who whispered about the peculiar Miss Hart who thought she could make it alone. The storm hit 20 minutes later. It came screaming across the salt flats like the devil's own fury, carrying enough dust to bury dreams and sand sharp enough to strip paint. Ada barely had time to shutter the windows before the world outside disappeared into a howling brown wall. The goats would have to fend for themselves in the shelter she'd built it solid against the hill, and they'd weathered worse. She was securing the last shutter when she heard it a thump against her door that wasn't wind. Then another, deliberate and heavy. Ada lifted the Winchester, thumbed back the hammer. "Who's there?" The wind swallowed her words. The thumping came again, weaker this time, against every instinct that had kept her safe these 2 years alone. Ada lifted the latch and cracked the door. The man collapsed across her threshold like a sack of grain, bringing a cloud of dust and the copper smell of blood with him. In the lamplight, she could see he was tall, lean-built, with dark hair gone gray with sand. Blood seeped through his shirt at the shoulder, and when he tried to push himself up, his arms shook like a newborn colt's legs. "Please," he said, the word barely audible above the storm. His eyes found hers gray-green like sage after rain. "Just need shelter." Ada had a choice to make, and she made it fast. She grabbed him under his good arm and hauled him inside. No easy task, given he had near a foot on her and seemed to be made entirely of hard angles and lean muscle. He tried to help, failed, and she ended up mostly dragging him to the rag rug by the stove. "You're shot," she said, which was stating the obvious, but the blood was making her hands shake as she pressed her father's old shirt against the wound. "Noticed that myself," he managed. Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp. Ada cursed a word her mother would have switched her for and set to work. The bullet had passed through the meat of his shoulder, which was lucky. She'd seen men die from less, but she'd also helped her father doctor enough injured miners to know what needed doing. She put water on to boil, tore strips from her last good petticoat, and tried not to think about the fact that she had a stranger bleeding on her floor while a sandstorm tried to tear her house apart. He came to while she was cleaning the wound, jerking hard enough that she had to lean on him to keep him still. "Easy," she said. "You'll start the bleeding again." His eyes focused on her face, pupils dark in the lamplight. "You're not Maggie." "No, I made a heart, and you're in my house, bleeding on my rug." "Who's Maggie?" He blinked, seemed to come more fully awake. No one. Sorry, I'm... He hesitated, and she saw calculation in his eyes. Jonah Cade. The name meant nothing to her, which was probably for the best. Dry Creek was the kind of place where men arrived with dust on their boots and shadows in their past, and asking too many questions was a good way to find trouble. She finished binding the wound, helped him sit up against the wall. He was pale beneath his sun-weathered skin, but his hands were steady when he accepted the cup of water she offered. "Thank you," he said. "I'll be gone when the storm passes." "You'll be gone when that shoulder's healed and not before," Ada said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I didn't waste good cloth patching you up just so you could go die in the desert." A smile ghosted across his face, there and gone like heat lightning. "Yes, ma'am." While he rested, Ada tidied up the blood and tried to make sense of what she'd done. She'd let a stranger into her house, a wounded man who'd clearly been in a gunfight. Her neighbors already thought she was touched in the head for living alone. This would give them enough gossip to last through winter. She was hanging the last of the bloody rags when she noticed his saddlebags by the door where he'd dropped them. Good leather, well-maintained, with JC burned into the flap. One was half open, and she could see the corner of what looked like papers inside. Curiosity killed the cat, her mother used to say, but Ada figured a woman who took in shot strangers was entitled to a little insurance. She opened the bag just enough to see inside. There were the usual things: ammunition, jerky, a dented flask, but there was also a leather wallet with papers, and beneath that, something that made her breath catch. A marshal's badge, the silver tarnished but the star unmistakable. Either Jonah Cade was a lawman, or he'd killed one, given that he'd shown up shot and half dead. She wasn't sure which possibility was worse. The storm raged on. Ada returned to her mending, the Winchester within easy reach, while the stranger slept fitfully against her wall. Outside, the wind howled its fury, and she found herself thinking of her father's other favorite saying, "Sometimes the devil you know is better than the angel you don't." But it was too late for such wisdom now. She'd made her choice when she opened that door. Near midnight, the fever took him. Ada had been expecting it. Wounds went bad fast in the desert, but that didn't make it easier when he started thrashing and calling out. She knelt beside him, using precious water to cool his burning skin, and tried to make out what he was saying. "Should have stayed down," he muttered. "Told you to stay down." "Jimmy, why didn't you—" His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to bruise. His eyes were open, but seeing something else. Someplace else. "It's all right," Ada said, keeping her voice low and steady like she did with spooked horses. "You're safe. It's all right." He focused on her slowly, the wildness fading from his eyes. "Water," he said. She helped him drink, noted how his hands shook. "Who's Jimmy?" The shudders came down in his eyes. "No one. Not anymore." By dawn, the storm had blown itself out, leaving the world scoured clean and strange. Ada stepped outside to check the goats and found them huddled but whole, bleeding their displeasure. The desert stretched out empty and peaceful. No sign of whatever violence had sent Jonah Cade to her door. When she returned inside, he was sitting up, trying to pull on his boots one-handed. "You're a fool," she said. "Been called worse." He managed the first boot, reached for the second. "I need to go. There'll be men looking for me." "What kind of men?" He met her eyes. "The kind you don't want finding you here with me." Ada crossed her arms. "I've got a rifle and know how to use it." "I don't doubt it, but a rifle won't stop Silas Crow when he comes calling." The name sent a chill down her spine. Everyone in Dry Creek knew about Silas Crow. Owned the Comstock mine before it played out. Now made his money in ways folks didn't talk about too loud. Water rights, mostly, though there were whispers of other things. "You law?" she asked. "Not anymore." "Then why's Crow after you?" He stood, swaying slightly. "Because I know things he'd rather I didn't. Look, Miss Hart, you've been kind, but— Ada? She interrupted. And you're not going anywhere until that shoulder's had at least another day to start healing. You try riding now. You'll be face down in the dirt before you make the road. They stared at each other. Stubborn meeting, stubborn. Finally, he sank back down, exhaustion winning over pride. One day, he said, then I'm gone. Ada nodded and went to make coffee. As she worked, she noticed him watching her. Something unreadable in those storm-colored eyes. It made her conscious of her worn dress, her calloused hands, the thousand small shabbiness of her life. She lifted her chin and ignored it. She'd learned long ago that a woman's worth wasn't in what others thought of her. The coffee was nearly ready when he spoke again. That map on your table, where'd you get it? Ada glanced at her father's papers, still spread where she'd been studying them the night before. My father drew them. He had notions about underground water, spent years marking where he thought it ran. Was he right? She shrugged. Never had the money to dig deep enough to find out. Why? Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Silas Crow's been buying up land all along the eastern ridge. Folks wonder why, since there's no silver left. But if your father was right about that water— He didn't need to finish. Water was more precious than silver in the desert. Control the water. Control everything. Ada looked at the maps with new eyes, then carefully rolled them up and tucked them behind her father's books on the shelf. When she turned back, Jonah was watching her with something that might have been approval. Smart, he said. I'm not just a face pretty enough to launch 1,000 ships, she said dryly. That surprised a laugh out of him, quickly cut short by a wince. I'd say you're worth at least 2,000 ships, Miss Ada. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she busied herself with the coffee to hide it. She wasn't a girl to have her head turned by a smooth-talking stranger, wounded or not. But it had been a long time since anyone had looked at her and seen something more than poor Ada Hart, too stubborn to know she needed a man. They spent the day in careful détente. Jonah slept fitfully while Ada went about her chores, always aware of his presence like a change in the weather. When evening came, she made a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and they ate in companionable silence. I should tell you, he said finally, in case Crow does come. I was bringing evidence to the federal marshal in Carson City. Proof that Crow's been poisoning wells to force folks to sell cheap. Ada's hands stilled. She thought of the Hendersons, who'd lost their baby girl to bad water last summer. The Martins, who'd sold their place for pennies on the dollar after their well went alkali. You have this proof? Had it. Crow's men caught up to me on the Carson Road. The papers are probably scattered across half the county by now. But you could testify. His smile was bitter. The word of a disgraced lawman against Silas Crow might as well spit in the wind. Why disgraced? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Because I used to ride for Crow, before I knew what he was. When I found out, I tried to stop him, but— He spread his hands. Badge or no badge, some stains don't wash clean. Ada studied him in the lamplight, this man who'd brought violence to her doorstep. He looked older than she'd first thought, maybe 35, with lines carved deep by sun and harder things. But there was something in his eyes when he talked about those poisoned wells, a hurt that went bone deep. We've all done things we're not proud of, she said finally. Question is what we do next. He met her eyes. What I do next is leave, before I bring more trouble to your door. But trouble, as Ada was learning, didn't wait for invitations. She woke to the sound of horses, lots of them, and men's voices carrying on the still air. Dawn was just a gray promise in the east. Beside the cold stove, Jonah was already awake, his pistol in his hand. How many? She whispered. 6, maybe 7. He was pulling on his boots, movement stiff but determined. I'll go out the back, draw them off. Like hell you will. Ada reached for the Winchester. This is my land. Nobody runs me off it. She thought he might argue, but instead, He smiled. A real one this time. All right then. But if shooting starts, you get down and stay down. Promise me. I don't make promises to men I've known less than 2 days. Fair enough. The riders were coming up the path now. Ada recognized Tom Brewster's voice, Crow's foreman. Mean as a snake and twice as quick to bite. Her hands were steady as she stepped onto the porch, rifle casual in her arms, but ready. Morning, Tom, she called out. You boys are up early. Brewster reined in his horse, the others spreading out behind him. Miss Hart, heard you might have had a visitor last night. Heard from who not many folks out in that storm to be seeing visitors. Don't play games. Girl, we tracked him here. Just hand him over and we'll be on our way. Only visitor I had last night was that sandstorm. Ada said, near tore my roof off. You see any strangers? You let me know. I'll give them what for about bringing trouble to my door. Brewster's eyes narrowed. Mind if we have a look inside, just to be sure? I do mind. This is my property, bought and paid for. You want to search it? You come back with papers from a real judge. Not that Puppet Crow keeps in his pocket. One of the other riders laughed nervously. Brewster's face darkened. Now see here. No, you see... Ada shifted the rifle. Just enough to make her point. I know my rights. I also know you've got no call to be here. Harassing a woman living alone. What would folks say if they heard Silas Crow was sending men to bother respectable ladies? It was a thin shield. Respectability. But sometimes it was all a woman had. Brewster chewed on it, clearly wanting to push but not quite willing to cross that line. Yet. This ain't over, he said finally. Crow wants to talk to you about them maps your daddy drew. You think on that. They rode off in a cloud of dust and threats. Ada stayed on the porch until they were out of sight. Then her knees gave out and she sat down hard on the steps. Jonah emerged from inside, moving quiet for a man his size. You've got sand, Ada Hart. Sand's about all I've got. Her hands were shaking now, delayed reaction. They'll be back. Yes. She looked up at him. So what do we do? He raised an eyebrow. You brought this to my door. Least you can do is help me figure a way out of it. He was quiet for a moment, then sat down beside her, careful of his shoulder. The sun was coming up properly now, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. All right, he said. And that simply, Ada Hart's life took another turn. She didn't know yet where it would lead, but as she sat there with this dangerous stranger who'd bled on her floor and brought gunmen to her door, she found she didn't much care. She'd been living careful for 2 years. And what had it got her a house that barely held together and neighbors who whispered behind their hands? Maybe it was time to try living dangerous instead. The drought deepened its grip on Dry Creek like a miser clutching coins. 3 days after Brewster's visit, the water in Ada's well dropped another foot, and she knew she'd have to make hard choices soon. The goats needed water. The vegetable patch needed water. And now she had a wounded man recovering in her barn who needed water too. Jonah had insisted on moving out of the house after that first night, claiming it wasn't proper. Ada had rolled her eyes at his sudden concern for her reputation, bit late for that with half the town already talking, but she'd helped him set up in the barn's tack room. He was healing faster than she'd expected, already able to move his arm without wincing much. You need to learn to shoot better, he announced that morning, watching her practice with the Winchester against tin cans set on the fence. Ada lowered the rifle, annoyed. I hit 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5 gets you killed when the other 2 are shooting back. He pushed off from the barn wall, walked over with that careful economy of movement she was beginning to recognize as habit, not injury. Here, you're jerking the trigger. She let him adjust her stance, tried not to notice how he smelled of leather and gunpowder, honest sweat, and something uniquely him. His hands were gentle but sure as he corrected her grip. Squeeze, don't pull, he said, his voice close to her ear. Like you're trying not to wake someone. The rifle cracked, and the can went flying. Better, he said, stepping back, and Ada felt oddly cold despite the morning sun. They spent an hour at it, until Ada's shoulder ached and she'd hit 10 cans in a row. When they stopped, Jonah was looking at her with something like approval. "You're a quick study." "Had to be. My father was a good teacher, but he didn't have much time at the end." She started collecting the cans, not wanting to think about those last months. "Why do you care if I can shoot?" "Because Crow won't give up. He wants those water maps, and he wants me dead. Sooner or later, he'll stop playing nice." "This is him playing nice." "You're still breathing, aren't you?" The blunt words sent a chill through her, but she kept her voice steady. "So, what do you suggest?" "I suggest you sell to him. Take whatever he offers and get out while you can." Ada spun to face him. "This is my home. My father is buried on that hill. I'm not running." "Pride makes a cold bedfellow, Ada, and cowardice makes a colder one." They glared at each other across the dusty yard. Then Jonah smiled, that rare, real expression that transformed his face. "All right, then. If you won't run, we'd better make sure you're ready for what's coming." That afternoon, Missy Bell rode out from town. Ada saw her coming from a ways off, hard to miss that bright yellow dress and the dust cloud from her father's old mule. Missy ran the telegraph office, one of the few women in town with paying work, and she'd been Ada's friend since childhood. "Lord have mercy, Ada Hart," Missy called out before she'd even dismounted. "The whole town's talking about you harboring desperados." "Just one desperado," Ada said dryly, "and he's more desperate than dangerous at the moment." Missy's eyes went wide when Jonah emerged from the barn, and Ada couldn't blame her. Even with his arm in a sling, he cut an impressive figure, tall and lean, with a face that looked carved from wind and stone. "Mr. Cade," Ada said formally. "This is Miss Melissa Bell. Missy, Mr. Jonah Cade." "Ma'am?" Jonah touched his hat brim, then made himself scarce, reading the situation with the instincts of a man who'd survived by knowing when to retreat. "Oh my," Missy said, fanning herself with her hand. "No wonder you took him in. That man could make a saint reconsider her vows." "Missy, what I've got eyes, don't I?" She dismounted, tied the mule in the shade. "Though, from what I'm hearing in town, you've got bigger problems than impure thoughts." They sat on the porch, and Missy shared what she'd heard. Silas Crow was putting it about that Ada was sitting on a fortune in gold claims her father had hidden. It was nonsense. Of course, if her father had gold claims, they wouldn't have spent his last years scraping by, but people believed what they wanted to believe. "He's also saying that drifter you took in is a wanted man. Murder and robbery in Carson City." "That's a lie." Missy studied her. "You sure about that?" "How well do you know this man, Ada?" Not well at all. Ada realized. She knew he'd worked for Crow and quit. Knew he'd been trying to get evidence to the federal marshals. Knew he had gentle hands and haunted eyes and a smile that did uncomfortable things to her insides. But that wasn't really knowing a man, was it? "I know enough," she said finally. "I hope so." Missy reached into her bag, pulled out a bundle of papers. "I brought you the week's newspapers. Thought you might want to see what's happening in the world beyond Dry Creek." But it wasn't the world beyond that caught Ada's attention. It was a small item in the Carson City paper. Dated 3 days ago. Federal Marshal James Morrison found dead on the Carson Road. Apparent victim of robbery, investigation ongoing. Her blood went cold. Morrison, Jimmy. Should have stayed down. Jimmy. She looked up to find Jonah standing in the barn doorway, watching her read. Their eyes met across the yard, and she saw in his face that he knew what she'd found. Missy left soon after, with promises to send word if she heard anything useful on the telegraph. Ada waited until the dust from her departure settled, then walked to the barn. Jonah was sitting on a barrel, cleaning his pistol with mechanical precision. He didn't look up when she entered. "Yes," he said. "Did you kill him?" "No. But you knew him." Jimmy Morrison." His hands stilled. "We rode together during the war. After, we both went into law work. He was a good man. Better than me." "What happened?" Jonah resumed cleaning, the rhythmic motion seeming to calm him. "I sent word to Jimmy about Crow's operation. Told him I had proof. We were supposed to meet on the Carson Road, but Crow's men got there first. They shot Jimmy, took the papers, shot me when I tried to stop them." "Why would they kill a federal marshal that brings down more heat than Crow would want?" "Because Jimmy wasn't just any marshal. He was building a case, had been for months. Water rights violations, intimidation, probably murder. With him dead and the evidence gone," he shrugged. "Crow owns the local law. Who's going to come asking questions?" Ada leaned against the wall, processing this. "So you were telling the truth. You were trying to stop him. Does it matter Jimmy's still dead? Those families Crow drove off their land are still gone. The truth doesn't bring any of them back." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Ada had seen that kind of guilt before, in her father's eyes when he talked about patients he couldn't save. "No," she said quietly, "but the truth might stop him from doing it again." Jonah looked up then, something flickering in his eyes. "You don't know what you're saying. Crow has money, men, connections. You've got 6 goats and a Winchester. And you, I'm no good to anyone. Haven't been for a long time." Ada crossed to him, took the pistol from his hands and set it aside. "Listen to me, Jonah Cade. I don't know what happened to you before you showed up bleeding on my doorstep. Don't much care either. But I know what I see now a man trying to do right. That's good enough for me." He stared at her for a long moment, then dropped his head into his hands. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Maybe, but I'll do it standing up, not crawling." That evening, they ate dinner together in the house. Propriety be damned. Ada had made biscuits to go with the beans, and Jonah praised them like they were feast food. She found herself telling him about her father, how he'd been a doctor back east before her mother's death sent him west seeking something, peace, maybe, or just a place where memories didn't lurk around every corner. "He taught me everything," she said. "Reading, writing, arithmetic, how to set a bone and birth a baby, how to shoot and how to think. Used to say I had a mind too good to waste on waiting for some man to marry me. Smart man. He was, until the lung fever took his wind and the pain took his sense. Those last months." She stopped, surprised to find tears threatening. "I'm glad he's not here to see what Crow's doing. Would have broken his heart." "Or made him fighting mad." "That too." They sat in comfortable silence, the lamp making a circle of light against the growing dark. Finally, Jonah spoke. "I have an idea. It's probably stupid, definitely dangerous, but it might give us a chance." "Tell me." "The telegraph office. Missy runs it. Right, how much does she see of what comes through?" "Everything, near as I can tell." "Why?" "Because if Crow's coordinating with buyers for the land he's stealing, with the judge he's bribing, with whoever else is in on this, he's not riding to Carson City every time. He's sending telegrams." Ada's breath caught. "Evidence. Maybe, if we could get copies, if Missy would help." "She would. Her brother lost his farm to Crow last year." Ada's mind was racing now. "But Crow would know if she was copying his messages." "Not if we were smart about it. Not all of them, just key ones. Build a pattern, show the conspiracy. And then what the federal marshal is dead. There are others. Newspapermen who'd love a story like this. Federal prosecutors who'd make their name on it. We just need enough proof that they can't ignore it." It was a slim hope, but it was more than they'd had that morning. Ada found herself smiling. "All right, I'll ride to town tomorrow. Talk to Missy." "Not alone, you won't." You can't show your face in town. Crow's probably got men watching for you." "Then we'll have to be clever about it." They planned late into the night, and when Ada finally sent Jonah back to the barn, he insisted, though she was past caring what anyone thought she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not quite hope, but maybe its cousin, purpose. She was banking the fire when she heard the horses, not the thundering approach of a raid, but the steady walk of riders who knew where they were going. Ada grabbed the Winchester, checked the load. Miss Hart. The voice was familiar but unexpected. Pastor Ezekiel Ortega, the Mexican minister who ran the small chapel at the edge of town. Miss Hart, I need to speak with you. Ada opened the door cautiously. The pastor sat his old mare easily despite his 60-some years. And beside him was another rider, Sarah Martinez, whose husband worked at the assay office. Pastor, Mrs. Martinez, it's late for a social call. Forgive us, the pastor said. But I thought you should know. Silas Crow has called a town meeting for tomorrow. He's going to propose a new water management committee. With himself as head, says it's for the good of all, to ensure fair distribution during the drought. Ada's stomach dropped. Control the water committee. Control who got water and who didn't. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Let me guess. Anyone who opposes him will find their wells running dry. Such things have been known to happen, the pastor said carefully. I also wanted to warn you he'll use your father's maps as justification. Say they prove water resources need to be managed centrally, for the town's benefit. My father's maps are his property, mine now. Sarah Martinez spoke up then, her voice soft but firm. The judge has already signed an order. Eminent domain for the public good. Ada gripped the doorframe hard enough to hurt. When? Tomorrow, after the vote, which will surely pass. Brewster and his men will come for the maps. And if I don't have them, the pastor's face was grave, then I fear they will tear your home apart looking. And if they still cannot find them, he didn't need to finish. Ada knew what happened to people who stood in Silas Crow's way. Thank you for the warning. There is one more thing. The pastor said, the man you shelter, Crow claims he murdered a federal officer. The town is divided, some believe, some don't. But if he is found here, I understand. They left with promises of prayers, which Ada appreciated even if she didn't entirely believe in their power. She stood on the porch, looking out at the star-drunk sky, and made her decision. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, she had work to do. She found Jonah already awake, standing in the barn door with his pistol drawn. I heard, he said. Then you know we're out of time. I'll leave tonight. Draw them off. No, she cut him off. We do this together or not at all. I've got an idea, but I need to know something first. That badge in your saddlebag, is it real? He was quiet for a moment. It was once. Could it be again? Ada, what are you thinking? She smiled, fierce in the darkness. I'm thinking it's time Silas Crow learned that some people don't scare easy. You game. He stepped out into the starlight, and she could see him clearly, this complicated man who'd brought danger to her door, but also something else. A chance to fight back, to matter. I'm game, he said. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky was clear. Maybe rain coming. Finally. Or maybe just the storm that had been building since the day Silas Crow decided he could own everything and everyone in Dry Creek. Either way, Ada thought, tomorrow would tell the tale. The railroad survey team arrived in Dry Creek like a dust devil carrying promises and threats in equal measure. Ada watched them from the telegraph office window, 4 men in city clothes trying to look comfortable under the desert sun, their fresh-pressed shirts already wilting in the heat. Northern Pacific Railway. Missy read from the telegram she'd received that morning, surveying for a spur line to connect the mining districts with the main track. More like surveying for which land Crow can steal next. Ada muttered. It had been a week since the town meeting where Crow had rammed through his water committee proposal. As expected, he now controlled who got water and when. Already, 2 families on the outskirts had found their wells mysteriously failing. There's something else, Missy said. lowering her voice, though they were alone in the office. "I've been copying Crow's telegrams like Mr. Cade suggested. Look at this." She showed Ada a message sent 3 days prior. "Railway representatives arriving Thursday. Ensure properties along proposed eastern route available for purchase. Price no object if ownership clear." "He knew they were coming," Ada said. "He's been forcing people out specifically along the route." "Gets worse." Missy pulled out another copy. "This went to Judge Harrington yesterday." Ada read "Federal inquiry possible. Ensure all documents properly filed and dated. Morrison matter contained, but vigilance required." Her hands tightened on the paper. Morrison matter. They were talking about a murdered federal marshal like he was a business problem to be solved. The door chimed, and both women jumped. But it was only Pastor Ortega, looking older than his years in the harsh morning light. "Ladies," he said, removing his hat. "I wonder if I might send a telegram to my cousin in Santa Fe." It was code. They'd worked out the system over the past week. The pastor served as go-between, reducing the risk of anyone connecting Ada directly to the copied messages. She slipped him the papers while Missy took down his actual telegram, something innocuous about planning a visit. "How is our mutual friend?" the pastor asked quietly. "Restless," Ada admitted. Jonah had spent the week transforming her property into something resembling a defensive position. Hidden caches of ammunition, clear fields of fire, escape routes planned and prepared. He'd also been teaching her things her father never had: how to move quietly, how to use cover, how to think like someone hunting rather than someone hunted. "Tell him patience," the pastor said. "God's time is not man's time." "Pretty sure Crow's working on his own schedule," Ada said dryly. The pastor's smile was sad. "Indeed. Which is why I also came to warn you. Brewster has been asking about your father's maps again. He seems to think you've hidden them somewhere in town." Ada kept her face carefully neutral. The maps were indeed hidden, but not in town. Jonah had suggested burying them in oilcloth near the old mine shaft 2 miles north. "If we need them, we can get them," he'd said. "If Crow's men find them there, at least they won't tear your house apart." "Let him ask," she said. After the pastor left, Ada helped Missy with the morning telegraph traffic. It was mundane stuff, mostly orders for goods, personal messages, business correspondence. But she'd learned to read between the lines, to see the patterns. More and more messages about land sales, about water rights, about the coming railroad. "Crow's going to own the whole valley soon," Missy said quietly. "Then what happens to the rest of us?" Before Ada could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they saw Brewster and 3 of his men surrounding someone in the street. Ada's heart lurched, but no, it wasn't Jonah. It was young Miguel Santos, who worked at the livery stable. "Stay here," Ada said, but Missy was already following her out. "Telling you, I don't know nothing about no maps," Miguel was saying, his voice high with fear. He couldn't be more than 17, thin as a rail with hands already scarred from honest work. "Boy's lying," Brewster said conversationally. "His mama does washing for the Hart place. Bet she's seen plenty." "My mother's got nothing to do with this." Brewster backhanded him casually, sending Miguel sprawling in the dust. "Don't sass me, boy." "That's enough." Ada stepped forward, aware of the Winchester's weight back in the telegraph office, wishing she'd brought it. Brewster's smile was all teeth. "Miss Hart, just the lady we wanted to see. This boy here was just about to tell us where you hid those maps." "Were they now in your possession?" "Miguel has no knowledge of any maps," Ada said clearly, pitching her voice to carry to the gathering crowd. "And you've got no call to be striking him in the street like a common thug." "Common thug." Brewster's face darkened. "You'd best watch your tongue, woman. Or what you'll hit me too, in front of half the town." Ada gestured to the watching faces: shopkeepers, wives, children. Not everyone was brave enough to stand up to Crow, but they were brave enough to watch, I'm sure, mister, Crow would love that kind of attention, especially with railroad men in town. It was a calculated risk, and it paid off. Brewster glanced around, seemed to realize how this looked. He hauled Miguel to his feet, shoved him away. "This ain't over," he said. "Mister, Crow's patience is wearing thin." "So is mine," Ada said. They locked eyes for a moment. Then Brewster gestured to his men, and they mounted up as they rode off. Ada helped Miguel dust himself off. "You all right?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." He lowered his voice. "My mama did see something, though. Saw you and that man burying something out by the old mine, but she won't tell nobody. I swear." Ada's blood chilled, but she kept her voice steady. "Your mother's a good woman. Miguel, you tell her I appreciate her discretion." The crowd dispersed, but the damage was done. If the Santos family knew about the buried maps, who else might have seen, and how long before Brewster started offering rewards for information? She found Jonah cleaning his rifle when she got home. The repetitive motion, something she'd learned, meant he was thinking hard. "Heard there was trouble in town," he said without looking up. "Brewster was roughing up the Santos boy. I intervened." "That was dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now." She sat down across from him, suddenly tired. "Miguel's mother saw us bury the maps. If Brewster starts squeezing people, we'll move them tonight," Jonah said. "Should have had multiple hiding spots from the start. That's my fault. You were half dead from a bullet wound at the time. I think you can be excused for imperfect planning." That got a small smile. "Your father teach you to make excuses for people?" "He taught me to see people clear, faults and virtues both." She watched him work, noticed how his hands never trembled despite everything hanging over them. "What did you want to be before all this?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Before the war, you mean, or before Crow?" "Before any of it." He was quiet for a long moment. "My father had a ranch in Texas. Nothing big, just enough cattle to make a living. I figured I'd take it over someday. Find a wife, raise kids, normal things. What happened? War happened. Then my father died while I was gone, and the carpetbaggers took the ranch for taxes. After that," he shrugged. "Badge seemed like a way to do some good. Turned out I was wrong about that too. You're doing good now. Am I seems like all I've done is bring you trouble." Ada reached out, stilled his hands on the rifle. "You've given me a chance to fight back. That's worth any trouble." He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something shifted in the air between them. Electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then voices carried from the road, and the moment shattered. "Riders coming," Jonah said, already moving. But it was just the railroad survey team, taking measurements along the property line. Ada and Jonah watched from the porch as they worked, efficient and methodical. "They're surveying for a water station," Jonah said quietly. "See how they're checking elevation, looking for a place to put a tank? Let me guess right where my well happens to be." "Near enough. Railroad needs water for the engines. Crow provides it. For a price. Anyone who won't sell gets driven out." Ada's jaw tightened. "We need those telegrams to prove it. Show the connection between Crow and whoever's bribing the railroad officials. Missy's collecting them, but it's slow and dangerous if Crow suspects." He didn't need to finish. They both knew what Crow did to people who crossed him. That night, they moved the maps. Jonah had scouted 3 new locations, one in a hollow tree near the creek, one under a cairn of stones on the hillside, one in the false bottom of an old feed bucket in the barn. They split the maps between the locations, so even if one cache was found, Crow wouldn't have everything. They worked by moonlight, Ada keeping watch while Jonah did the hiding. She found herself studying his profile in the silver light, the way shadows pooled in the hollows of his face. He'd filled out some in the 2 weeks since he'd arrived, her cooking putting meat back on his bones, but there was still something wolfish about him, something wild that wouldn't be tamed. "You're staring," he said without turning around. Heat flooded her cheeks. "Just keeping watch." "Uh-huh." She could hear the smile in his voice. "See anything interesting?" "Just a stubborn man who doesn't know when to quit. Takes one to know one." They were heading back to the house when they saw the orange glow on the horizon. Fire, and from the direction... "That's the Santos place," Ada breathed. They ran, arriving to find the small house already half consumed. Miguel and his family stood in the yard, his mother weeping while his father tried uselessly to fight the flames with buckets from their well. "Is everyone out?" Jonah demanded. "Say, yes, everyone is safe. Mr. Santos said, but the house—" "Let it go," Jonah said firmly. "Houses can be rebuilt." Other neighbors were arriving now, forming a bucket brigade more to show solidarity than from any hope of saving the structure. Ada found herself next to Mrs. Chen from the laundry, passing buckets until her arms ached. "Brewster's men were here earlier." "Mrs." Chen murmured. "Asking questions about you. Santos wouldn't tell them nothing." So this was the price of loyalty. Ada looked at the Santos family, huddled together watching their home burn, and felt rage rise in her throat like bile. "This has to stop," she said. "Mrs." Chen's face was grim. "How Crow owns the water, the judge, probably the railroad too. What can people like us do?" It was the question that haunted Ada as they watched the house collapse into embers. What could they do against such wealth and power and ruthlessness? She found her answer in the faces around her, tired faces, scared faces, but also angry faces, people who'd been pushed too far, too long. "We can stand together," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "We can refuse to be driven out one by one." "Pretty words," someone called out. "But Crow's got the guns." "So do we," Jonah said, stepping into the firelight. He'd kept to the shadows till now, but he moved among them openly, letting them see him clear. "Every farmer's got a rifle, every shopkeeper. You just have to be willing to use them." "You're that killer Crow's hunting." Brewster's voice came from the darkness. He stepped into view, backed by 6 men. "Thought I smelled something rotten." "Only thing rotten here is you, Brewster," Old Man Thompson said, surprising everyone. The ancient blacksmith rarely spoke up, but when he did, people listened. "Burning out families in the night like common raiders." "Fire was an accident," Brewster said smoothly. "Tragic, but these things happen, especially to folks who don't mind their own business." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ada saw hands drift toward weapons, saw the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then Pastor Ortega stepped forward, placing himself between the two groups. "Enough blood has been spilled in this valley," he said quietly. "Will we add more tonight? Look around you, neighbors, friends, children watching. Is this what we want them to learn? That might makes right." "Pretty speech, Padre," Brewster said. "But might does make right, always has." "Then you're no better than animals," Miguel's mother said suddenly, her tear-streaked face fierce in the dying firelight. "Animals who burn and steal and threaten. My grandfather fought men like you in Mexico, called themselves government, but they were just bandits with papers." Others murmured agreement. The crowd was growing, drawn by the fire and staying for the confrontation. Ada saw faces in windows, figures on rooftops. The whole town was watching. Brewster seemed to sense the shifting mood. "Mr. Crow will hear about this. All of you, standing with a known killer." "Only killers I see are the ones who burn out families," Ada said clearly. "The ones who poison wells and steal land and murder federal marshals on the Carson Road." The words dropped like stones in water, ripples spreading through the crowd. Brewster's face went dark. "That's a dangerous accusation, Miss Hart." "Truth often is." They stared at each other across the dying fire. Then Brewster smiled, cold as winter wind. You've made your choice, then all of you. He looked around the crowd, memorizing faces. Don't say you weren't warned. He and his men mounted up and rode off, leaving silence in their wake. Then Mrs. Chen spat in the dust where he'd stood, and the spell broke. We'll help rebuild, Thompson said to the Santos family. Won't be fancy, but it'll be solid. Others chimed in with offers: lumber, labor, food while they worked. It was the way of frontier towns, pulling together in crisis. But Ada knew it was more than that. Lines had been drawn tonight, sides chosen. War's coming, Jonah said quietly beside her. It's been here a while, she replied. We just finally admitted it. They stayed until dawn, helping the Santos family salvage what they could. As the sun rose, painting the mountains gold and red, Ada looked out over the town she'd called home for 7 years. It looked different now, fragile and precious and worth fighting for. What now? Miguel asked, soot-streaked and exhausted, but with new steel in his young eyes. Ada looked at Jonah, saw her own determination reflected in his face. Now we get ready, she said. And we make Silas Crow wish he'd never heard of Dry Creek. The canyon trail to Willow Springs narrowed where ancient floods had carved the rock into a maze of channels and dead ends. Ada guided her mare carefully, following the path her father had marked years ago when he'd first suspected water ran beneath these stones. Behind her, Jonah kept watch, rifle across his saddle. There, she said, pointing to a seep in the rock where green moss clung despite the drought. Father thought the whole aquifer runs through here. Underground river feeding springs all along the valley. If he was right, whoever controls this canyon controls the water for 50 miles. Jonah dismounted, studied the terrain with a soldier's eye. Crow knows. He's guessing. That's why he wants the map so bad. Father marked every seep, every green spot, every place the rock formation suggested water below. They'd come out before dawn, taking a roundabout route to avoid Brewster's patrols. 2 days had passed since the Santos fire, and the town felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. More families had found their wells failing, while others discovered their land claims mysteriously challenged in court. We need to get word out, Jonah said. Federal marshals, newspapers, someone who can't be bought. Missy's been trying, but every telegram has to go through the relay station in Carson City, if Crow has men there. A rifle shot cracked through the morning air, stone chips exploding near Ada's head. She threw herself behind a boulder as more shots followed, echoes making it impossible to tell how many shooters. Stay down. Jonah already had his rifle up, scanning the rim. Another shot sparked off the rocks, and he fired back, the report deafening in the narrow canyon. Ada crawled to where the horses danced nervously, grabbed her Winchester from its scabbard. Her hands were steady, all that practice paying off, as she found a position with clear sight lines. How many? She called. 3, maybe 4, spread along the north rim. Jonah fired again, methodical and calm. They were waiting, knew we'd come here. Ada's stomach dropped. If they knew about this place, did they know about the hidden maps? She pushed the thought away, worry about that later. Survive this now. A figure moved among the rocks above, and she fired without thinking. The man yelped and ducked back. A nice shot, Jonah said. Keep them honest while I work around. Like hell, we stay together. More gunfire erupted, bullets whining off stone. Ada counted muzzle flashes, definitely 4 shooters, positioned to pin them down while others moved in. Classic ambush tactics. Ada, Jonah's voice was deadly calm. When I start shooting, you get on that mare and ride hard back the way we came. I said we stay together. And I said... His words cut off as horsemen appeared at the canyon mouth behind them. Trapped. But the riders coming up the trail weren't Brewster's men. Pastor Ortega led them, of all people. Flanked by Thompson the blacksmith and half a dozen others Ada recognized from town. They came in fast, guns drawn, and suddenly the ambushers were caught between two forces. "Thought you might need help," the pastor called out, surprisingly cheerful for a man of God in a gunfight. "Mrs. Bell saw Brewster's men riding out before dawn. Figured they weren't heading to church." The shooting from the rim had stopped, the ambushers realizing their advantage was gone. Ada heard horses moving fast up above retreat. "Let them go," Jonas said as some of the townsmen made to pursue. "We got what we needed." "Which was?" Thompson asked, his ancient shotgun still smoking. Ada understood first. "Witnesses. If they'd killed us out here, Crow could claim we were stealing water, trespassing, anything, but with half the town watching, hard to lie about murdered women when there's a preacher involved." Ortega agreed, though I'd prefer to avoid violence altogether. "That ship sailed when they burned the Santos house, Padre," Thompson said grimly. They regrouped at the canyon mouth, and Ada was surprised to see more riders arriving the Martinez family. Mrs. Chen and her sons, even young Miguel Santos on a borrowed horse. "What is this?" she asked. "Town meeting," Thompson said. "The real kind. Not Crow's puppet show. Figured it was safer out here than anywhere Brewster might be listening." They gathered in a natural amphitheater where the canyon widened. Nearly 40 people by Ada's count. Not the whole town, but more than she'd expected. More than Crow would like. "We can't keep going like this." Sarah Martinez said, "My husband heard at the assay office Crow's bringing in professional guns from Virginia City. Pinkertons. Maybe worse." "Then we need law on our side," someone called out. "Real law. The nearest federal marshal is 3 days' ride." Thompson pointed out, "And that's if he's not bought like the last one." "Not bought," Jonas said quietly. "Morrison was a good man. That's why they killed him." Silence greeted this, everyone remembering the newspaper reports of the marshal found dead on the Carson Road. "There might be another way." Missy Bell spoke up. She'd arrived with the last group, proper dress traded for riding clothes. "I've been copying Crow's telegrams like Mr. Cade suggested, but I've also been sending copies out on the wire, coded in personal messages to my cousin in San Francisco." "Your cousin?" Ada asked. Missy smiled. "Charlotte Bell. She writes for the San Francisco Chronicle. Social pieces mostly, but she knows people. Real journalists who'd love a story about corruption and murder in the mining territories." Hope flickered through the group. The press could be more powerful than guns sometimes, especially with the railroad watching. Bad publicity might make even Crow's backers nervous. "It's not enough," Pastor Ortega said gently. "Stories in newspapers won't stop bullets. We need to be prepared for worse to come." "Then we prepare." This from Chen's eldest son, a young man who'd been quiet until now. "My family fled violence in China. Came here for peace, but sometimes peace has to be fought for." "The boy's right," Thompson said. "Question is, are we fighters or sheep?" Ada looked around the circle's shopkeepers and farmers, women and men who'd come west seeking better lives and found instead another kind of oppression. She thought of her father, how he'd believed in this place, in the possibility of building something good in the desert. "We're not fighters," she said. "We're builders, but sometimes builders have to defend what they've built." "Pretty words," Jonas said, but he was almost smiling. "Practically speaking, we need organization, patrols, communication, plans for when Crow makes his move." "You were a soldier," Thompson said. It wasn't a question. "Once, and a lawman after that, for all the good it did." Jonah looked around the group. "I won't lie to you, Crow has advantages. Money, men, the law in his pocket, but you have something he doesn't." "What's that?" Miguel asked. "Each other, and you have right on your side, which counts for more than you'd think when bullets start flying. Men fight harder for their homes than for wages." They spent the next hour planning. Guard rotations for the vulnerable families. Signal systems using mirrors during the day, lanterns at night, cache points for ammunition and supplies. It felt like preparing for war because that's what it was. "What about the water?" Chen asked. "Even if we fight off Crow's men, he still controls the committee. He can legally shut off our water." Ada and Jonah exchanged glances. She made the decision. "My father's maps show water sources Crow doesn't know about. Springs, seeps, places to dig new wells. If we're careful, we can establish our own water supply." "You'd share this?" Martinez asked. "Surprised? This information is worth a fortune." "It's worth nothing if Crow takes it. Better we all have water than none of us." The group stirred. New energy in their faces. Water meant survival. Water meant hope. "I'll need to retrieve the maps." Ada continued. "They're hidden, but—" "We'll go with you," Thompson said immediately. "Enough of us that Brewster won't dare interfere." As the meeting broke up, people scattered back to town in small groups, taking different routes. Ada found herself riding beside Jonah, the morning sun now high and harsh. "That was well done," he said. "Your father would be proud." "He'd be horrified," Ada corrected. "He came here to escape violence, not court it." "Sometimes violence finds you whether you court it or not. Question is what you do when it arrives." They were entering the narrow defile that led to her property when Jonah suddenly reined up, hand raised for silence. Ada heard it 2 horses ahead, moving slow. "Back," Jonah whispered, but it was too late. Brewster emerged from behind a stand of cottonwoods. 6 men with him. Not an ambush exactly, but close enough. "Miss Hart, Cade." Brewster's smile was all satisfaction. "Interesting meeting you all had. Yes, we were watching. Crow likes to know what his neighbors are up to." "Public gathering," Ada said steadily. "No law against it." "No, but there's laws against conspiracy, inciting rebellion, harboring fugitives." His eyes fixed on Jonah. "That last one's a hanging offense." "I'm no fugitive," Jonah said. "Federal warrant says different. Came through this morning murder of Marshal James Morrison. Seems someone remembered seeing you on the Carson Road that day." Ada's heart sank. A federal warrant changed everything. Even if it was based on lies, it gave Crow legal cover for whatever came next. "Convenient timing," Jonah said. "Let me guess, Crow's got a judge in Carson City, too. Judge Pemberton's a respected jurist. His word carries weight." Brewster's hand rested on his pistol. "So, here's what happens. You come quiet, Cade. Stand trial like a civilized man. Miss Hart goes home and thinks real hard about those maps everyone's so interested in." "And if I don't come quiet, then things get uncivilized real quick. Maybe Miss Hart gets caught in the crossfire. Maybe that meeting this morning gets remembered as sedition. A lot of good people could get hurt." It was a trap, neat as could be. Come quietly and hang for a murder he didn't commit, or fight and give Crow excuse to crack down on everyone who'd stood against him. Ada saw Jonah's jaw tighten, saw him calculating odds. 7 men, all armed, all ready. Even if they won the fight, the consequences. "I'll come," Jonah said. "No." Ada moved her mare between them. "You can't." "Yes, I can." His eyes met hers, trying to say everything they couldn't put in words. "Take care of things while I'm gone. You know what needs doing." "This is touching," Brewster drawled. "But we're burning daylight, Cade." Jonah dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. One of Brewster's men took his weapons while another produced shackles. "Iron's not necessary," Jonah said. "Humor me." Brewster watched the shackles click shut with satisfaction. "Can't have you getting ideas on the road." They put him on a horse, hands chained to the saddle horn. Ada watched, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. "This isn't over," she told Brewster. "No, it's just beginning." He tipped his hat mockingly. "You have a nice day now, Miss Hart, and think about those maps. Crow's patience ain't infinite." They rode off in a cloud of dust, Jonah never looking back. Ada sat frozen until they disappeared around a bend, then wheeled her mare and rode hard for town. Missy was in the telegraph office, already sending messages. "I heard. Thompson told me." "Wire your cousin." Ada interrupted. "Tell her everything. Names, dates, all of it. And wire the federal prosecutor in San Francisco, the territorial governor, anyone who might listen." "Already started, but Ada, if they hang him before—" "They won't." Ada's voice was steel. "Crow needs a trial, needs it to look legal. That gives us time." "Time for what?" Ada thought of the maps hidden in 3 locations, of the people who'd gathered in the canyon that morning, of Jonah in chains riding toward a rigged trial. "Time to show Silas Crow he's not the only one who can play this game," she said. Outside, storm clouds were building over the mountains, the first Ada had seen in months. Maybe rain coming at last, or maybe just another empty promise in a land full of them. Either way, she had work to do. The wagon wheels caught in another rut, jarring Ada's teeth as thunder rolled across the valley. She and Jonah had been traveling since sunset, taking back roads toward Virginia City, where the federal court held session. They'd rescued him from Crow's jail just 6 hours ago, a desperate plan involving Missy's forged telegraph orders and Thompson's knowledge of the jail's weak points. "You're bleeding again," Ada said, noticing the dark stain spreading on Jonah's shirt, where Brewster's men had been none too gentle. "I'm fine. Keep driving." But she could hear the strain in his voice. The rescue had gone sideways when Brewster arrived unexpectedly, and Jonah had taken a rifle stock to the ribs in the fight that followed. They'd gotten away, barely, but now Crow's men were hunting them with dogs and determination. Lightning flickered, illuminating the narrow trail ahead. They'd chosen this route through Skeleton Pass because Crow's men wouldn't expect it. The old logging road was half washed out and treacherous, even in good weather. With a storm coming, it was borderline suicidal. "There," Jonah pointed to a widening in the trail where ruins of an old way station crumbled against the cliff. "Pull in there." Ada guided the team into the shelter of the ruins just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within moments, it became a deluge, water cascading off the cliff face in sheets. "They won't track us through this," Jonah said, climbing down stiffly from the wagon bed where he'd been watching their back trail. "They won't need to. Crow knows where we're heading. It's the only place that makes sense." Ada secured the horses under what remained of the station's roof, trying not to think about what would happen when Crow's men caught up. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the mountains. In the wagon bed, their precious cargo, the original documents Missy had hidden. Crow's telegrams proving conspiracy and murder was wrapped in oilcloth against the rain. "We should have made copies," Ada said. "Left them with Thompson." "No time. Besides, copies can be dismissed as forgeries. We need the originals to make anyone listen." He was right, but that didn't make their situation less desperate. 2 people in a broken wagon against however many guns Crow could muster. Ada heard horses on the trail below, distant yet, but coming. The storm had slowed them, but not stopped them. She looked at Jonah, saw the same realization in his eyes. "Help me block the trail," he said, moving toward a pile of old timbers. They worked together, using the wagon to push debris across the narrow track. It wouldn't stop determined riders, but it might slow them enough. The rain had become a solid wall of water, turning the trail to mud. "Inside," Jonah said as voices carried up from below. The old station was mostly collapsed, but one corner still stood solid stone walls and a partial roof. They huddled there, weapons ready. As the voices grew closer, "That's far enough, Brewster," Jonah called out when the first riders appeared. "Another step and we start shooting." Brewster's laugh carried over the storm. "You're outnumbered 8-2. Cade, and one of you's a woman. How long you think you'll last?" "Long enough to put a bullet in you," Ada called back, sighting down her rifle. "You're sitting pretty tall on that horse." Miss Hart, this ain't no place for you. Come on down. Give us them papers. And Crow might still let you walk away. Like he let the Santos family walk away like Marshall Morrison. Lightning crashed. Illuminating the scene, Brewster and his men spread across the blocked trail, rain streaming off their hat brims. In that white light moment, Ada saw more riders coming up behind. Too many. Last chance, Brewster called. Throw out them guns. His words cut off as a new sound penetrated the storm, a deep groaning from somewhere above. Ada felt it through the stone wall at her back, a vibration that had nothing to do with thunder. Flash flood. Jonah breathed. The rain's coming off the peaks. The mountain answered him with a roar. Above the pass, millions of gallons of water had been collecting, funneling into the narrow canyon. Now it came down like God's own vengeance, a wall of water and mud and tumbling boulders. Ride, someone screamed below. Brewster's men scattered, but there was nowhere to go on the narrow trail. Ada watched in horror as the flood swept through, horses and men tumbling like toys. The old station shook but held, built by men who knew these mountains' moods. In moments, it was over. The main force of the flood had passed, leaving a transformed landscape. The trail was gone, carved away by the water. Of Brewster's 8 men, Ada could see only 2 still clinging to the far cliff. Inside the wagon, Jonah said urgently. We need to get higher. They climbed into the wagon bed just as a second surge came through, smaller but still powerful enough to shift the wagon sideways. The horses screamed, fighting their ties. That's when Ada saw him, Brewster, half buried in mud against a boulder, one leg bent at an impossible angle, still alive, but trapped as water rose around him. Help me, he gasped when he saw them. Please. Like you helped Morrison. Jonah's voice was cold as the rain. I didn't, that wasn't supposed to. Brewster coughed, spat mud. Crow said just scare him off. But Hollis, he got carried away, started shooting. Save it for the judge, Ada said. But even as she spoke, she was reaching for the rope coiled in the wagon. Whatever Brewster had done, she couldn't watch a man drown. Ada, no. Jonah caught her arm. It's too dangerous. She met his eyes. My father was a doctor. He took an oath to do no harm. I can't take that oath, but I won't stand by and watch a man die when I could save him. Something shifted in Jonah's expression. All right, but we do this smart. They worked together, Jonah anchoring the rope while Ada made her way down to Brewster. The water was rising fast, already to his chest. His face was gray with pain and fear. Broken leg, she assessed quickly. Maybe ribs too. This is going to hurt. Just do it, he gasped. She got the rope under his arms, trying to be gentle, but knowing speed mattered more. The water was cold, strong, trying to pull her downstream. Now, she called. Jonah hauled on the rope, muscles straining. For a moment, Ada thought they wouldn't make it. The current was too strong, Brewster's weight too much. Then the rope inched upward, dragging both of them toward safety. They pulled Brewster into the wagon just as another surge swept through. He lay gasping, rain and tears mixing on his face. Why? He asked. Why save me? Because that's what separates us from men like Crow. Ada said, we choose to be better. Brewster closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. The papers you have, they're not enough. Crow's got judges, territorial officials, even a senator back east. But I know where he keeps the real records. Names, amounts, everything. Why tell us now? Jonah asked suspiciously. Because I'm tired of being owned. Brewster shifted, winced. Started out just needing work. Then one compromise led to another until I was burning out families. Morrison was the last straw. He was a good man. I told myself I was just following orders, but... Thunder crashed again. But the rain was easing. The worst of the storm had passed, leaving them stranded but alive. Where? Ada asked. Where does Crow keep these records? His office safe, but also copies in the bank safety deposit box under a false name. I can get you in, but... He looked at his twisted leg. Not like this. They spent the rest of the night huddled in the wagon, taking turns on watch. The two survivors from Brewster's group had disappeared, probably riding hard to tell Crow what happened. Come dawn, there'd be decisions to make. You should have let me drown, Brewster said during his watch. He'd insisted on taking a turn despite the pain. Would have been easier. Easier isn't always right, Ada replied. She was cleaning her rifle, the repetitive motion soothing. My father used to say every choice we make is a stone in the bridge of who we become. Save a man or let him die either way. You have to live with who that makes you. Brewster was quiet for a long while. Then, your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was also stubborn as a mule and too trusting by half. But wise, yes. Mine was a drunk. Beat us kids regular until the day he picked a fight with the wrong man and got himself killed. I swore I'd be different. Make something of myself. His laugh was bitter. Guess I did. Made myself into Crow's trained dog. Dogs can learn new tricks, Jonah said from where he was keeping watch. Dawn came pale and watery, revealing the devastation. The trail was gone. The canyon floor 20 feet deeper than before. They'd have to find another way out, and soon. Crow would send more men once he heard. There's an old mining track, Brewster offered. Comes out near Sawmill Creek. Rough going, but possible. They loaded up, Brewster gritting his teeth as they moved him. The documents were safe, wrapped in their oilcloth, but Ada knew paper alone wouldn't be enough. They needed witnesses, testimony, a judge who couldn't be bought. The mining track was barely worthy of the name, a ghost of a trail clinging to the cliff face. Ada drove while Jonah scouted ahead on foot, checking for washouts. Progress was agonizingly slow. It was midday when they heard horses again, not behind them, ahead. Jonah came scrambling back. Riders coming up the track, 4, maybe 5. Ada's heart sank, trapped between cliff and canyon, nowhere to run. Wait, Brewster said. Let me see. Jonah helped him sit up enough to peer ahead. A strange expression crossed Brewster's face. That's not Crow's men. That's Deputy Federal Marshal Harlan, from Carson City. Could be Crow bought him too, Jonah said grimly. No, Harlan's straight as they come. Crow tried once, and Harlan arrested the man doing the bribing. Brewster looked at them. Must be your telegraph friend got through. They waited, weapons ready but hope kindling. The riders came into view, 4 men in federal badges, led by a grizzled man with eyes like flint. That Jonah Cade, Harlan called out. Got a telegram saying you had evidence regarding Marshal Morrison's murder. We do, Ada called back. Also got a wagon full of trouble and a hurt man who's willing to testify. Harlan rode closer, careful. His eyes took in Brewster. The muddy wagon, the oilcloth bundles. Tom Brewster, he said. Last I heard, you were Crow's right hand. Things change. Brewster said simply, I'm ready to tell what I know, all of it. Harlan studied them all for a long moment. Then he smiled, fierce as a wolf. Well then, seems like Silas Crow's bad luck is about to catch up with him. Let's get you folks somewhere safe and start taking statements. Justice is coming to Dry Creek, and it's been a long time coming. They formed a convoy, federal marshals flanking the wagon. As they descended toward the valley, Ada felt Jonah's hand find hers on the wagon seat. She squeezed back, neither of them speaking. There was still danger ahead. Crow wouldn't go down easy, but for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt something more than determination. She felt hope. Behind them, storm clouds gathered again over the peaks, but ahead, the sky was clearing, sun breaking through in golden shafts. It seemed like a promise, or maybe a blessing. Either way, Ada Hart intended to see this through. For her father, For the families Crow had destroyed, for the future of Dry Creek. And maybe, just maybe, for the man sitting beside her who'd bled for strangers and chosen to stand when running would have been safer. Some things, she was learning, were worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. The wagon rolled on, carrying its precious cargo of truth toward whatever judgment waited. And in that moment, with Jonah's hand warm in hers and justice riding alongside, Ada felt her father would be proud. The federal courthouse in Virginia City was a hastily constructed affair of pine boards and ambition, but it served its purpose. Ada sat in the gallery, watching as Tom Brewster gave his testimony from a wheeled chair, his broken legs stretched out before him. 3 days had passed since their rescue on the mountain, and the territorial prosecutor had moved with surprising speed. And Mr. Crow ordered the poisoning of the Henderson well in June, Brewster was saying, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Said if they wouldn't sell, we'd make their water worthless. Silas Crow sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit and calm demeanor at odds with the ugly truths being revealed. His lawyer, brought in from San Francisco at considerable expense, objected frequently, but the evidence was overwhelming. Missy's copied telegrams, the original documents Ada and Jonah had protected, and now Brewster's testimony painted a picture of systematic corruption and violence. And Marshal Morrison, the prosecutor asked. Tell us about that night. Brewster's hands clenched on his chair arms. Crow got word Morrison was coming with federal warrants, sent me and 5 men to intercept, said to scare him off, make him think twice. But Hollis Crow's gunman, he started shooting before Morrison could even speak. It became a slaughter. And Jonah Cade tried to stop it. He'd arranged the meeting, wanted to hand over evidence peaceful-like. When the shooting started, he tried to protect Morrison, got shot for his trouble. We left him for dead. Ada glanced at Jonah, sitting beside her in his one good suit. His face was carved stone, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Reliving that night couldn't be easy. Your witness, the judge said to Crow's lawyer. The cross-examination was brutal, the lawyer painting Brewster as a liar trying to save his own skin. But Brewster held firm, and when the lawyer pushed too hard about specific dates, Missy Bell was called to corroborate with her telegraph records. The trial had become the event of the season in Virginia City. Newspaper men from as far as San Francisco crowded the gallery, their pencils scratching endlessly. The story of Dry Creek's resistance to a would-be water baron had caught the public imagination. This about more than one town, Pastor Ortega had said that morning. All across the territories, men like Crow think they can take what they want. This trial says maybe they're wrong. The prosecutor called witness after witness. The Santos family testified about their burned home. Mrs. Chen described the systematic pressure on Chinese families to sell cheap. Thompson, the blacksmith, produced records showing how Crow's water committee had cut off supply to force compliance. Through it all, Crow sat unmoved, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. Only when Ada was called to testify did something flicker in his eyes. Miss Hart, the prosecutor began. Please tell the court about your father's water surveys. Ada spoke clearly, explaining how her father had spent years mapping underground water sources, how Crow had tried to steal that information. She produced the maps themselves, carefully preserved, showing the hidden aquifers that could transform the valley. These maps represent the future of Dry Creek, she said. Water enough for everyone, if managed fairly. Mr. Crow wanted to control that future, to dole out life itself for profit. Objection, Crow's lawyer said. Speculation about my client's intentions. Sustained. Jury will disregard. But the damage was done. The jury, 12 men from across the territory, were leaning forward, engaged. These were men who understood water's value in the desert, who'd maybe faced similar pressures themselves. The defense's case was predictable. Crow was a businessman, perhaps aggressive, but operating within the law. The water committee was a legitimate response to drought. Any violence was the work of overzealous employees acting without authority. Then came the moment Ada had been dreading. Crow himself took the stand. Up close, he looked smaller than she'd expected. Just a man in his 50s with silver at his temples and hands that had never known hard labor. But his voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of wealth and certainty. "I built Dry Creek," he said simply. "When I arrived, it was nothing but scattered shacks and failed dreams. I brought in money, jobs, civilization. Yes, I sought to organize water distribution because without organization, we'd all perish in the desert. If that makes me a criminal, then guilty as charged." He was good, Ada had to admit, smooth and reasonable, painting himself as a visionary betrayed by ungrateful locals. When asked about Morrison's death, he expressed shock and sorrow. When questioned about the poisoned wells, he suggested natural contamination, perhaps arsenic from old mine workings. "And what of Mr. Brewster's testimony?" the prosecutor pressed. Crow's expression was sad. "Tom Brewster suffered terrible injuries in that flash flood. Head trauma can cause confusion, false memories. I hold no anger toward him, only pity." It went on for hours. Crow had an answer for everything, a reasonable explanation that might create doubt. Ada felt hope slipping away as some jury members nodded along. Then the prosecutor played his final card. "Your Honor, the prosecution recalls Jonah Cade." Jonah rose, his movements careful. He'd testified earlier about finding Morrison's body, but this was different. Ada could see it in his walk. "In Mr. Cade," the prosecutor said once Jonah was sworn in. "You previously worked for Mr. Crow, correct?" "I did. 6 months in 77 providing security for his mining operations." "Why did you leave?" Jonah was silent for a long moment. Then, "Because I discovered he was poisoning wells to drive out Mexican families from land he wanted. When I confronted him, he offered to double my pay if I'd keep quiet." "And did you?" "To my eternal shame, yes, for 2 weeks. I said nothing while families sickened. Then the Vasquez baby died, little girl, not even 2 years old. I quit that day." "And after?" "I went to the territorial authorities. They said without proof, there was nothing to be done. So I started gathering proof. Took me over a year to build a case. Convinced Jim Morrison to listen. The defendant claims he's a builder, a bringer of civilization." The prosecutor said, "You knew him personally. What's your assessment?" Jonah turned to look directly at Crow. "Silas Crow is a man who sees people as numbers in a ledger, profit and loss. He'd poison a baby's well if it meant gaining an acre of land, then sleep sound believing he'd done smart business. He's not a builder, he's a parasite, feeding on other folks' dreams." "Objection," Crow's lawyer shouted. Sustained. "Jury will." But Jonah wasn't done. "You want to know what kind of man Silas Crow is? Ask him about Maria Vasquez. Ask him to look her in the eye and say her daughter's death was just business." The courtroom erupted. The judge hammered for order while Crow's face flushed dark red. When quiet finally returned, Crow's careful mask had slipped, revealing something ugly beneath. The rest happened fast. Closing arguments, jury instructions, then the wait. Ada, Jonah, and the others from Dry Creek gathered in a nearby restaurant, too nervous to eat but needing the company. "Whatever happens," Thompson said, raising his coffee cup, "we stood up. That matters." "It matters more if we win," Missy said practically. The jury was out for 6 hours. When word came they'd reached a verdict, the courtroom filled quickly. Ada found herself gripping Jonah's hand as the foreman stood. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty." The gallery exploded. Crow shot to his feet, shouting something lost in the noise. His lawyer was demanding a mistrial while federal marshals moved to take Crow into custody. On the charge of corruption of public officials, guilty. On the charge of criminal conspiracy to defraud, guilty. Guilty, Guilty, guilty. The word rang like church bells as each charge was read. 20 years to life, the judge announced. Silas Crow would likely die in Yuma prison. As they led Crow away, he passed close to where Ada stood. For a moment, their eyes met. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I have friends, resources." "Your friends are running for cover," Marshal Harlan said, pushing Crow along. "Your accounts are frozen, your property seized. It's over. Crow, you lost." Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. Reporters shouted questions while photographers' flashes popped like fireworks. Ada found herself separated from Jonah in the crowd, pushed toward a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle. "Miss Hart, how does it feel to have brought down Silas Crow?" "I didn't bring him down," Ada said clearly. "He brought himself down with greed and cruelty. The people of Dry Creek just held up a mirror." "What's next for the town? We rebuild? We've already formed a cooperative for water management, with shares held by all residents. My father's maps will help us develop new sources. Dry Creek will survive. And personally, there are rumors you and Mr. Cade." But Ada was already pushing through the crowd, seeking Jonah. She found him by the courthouse steps, talking with Marshal Harlan. Both men looked serious. "Offer stands," Harlan was saying. "We need good men. Your record's clean now. Could have your badge back by week's end." Jonah saw Ada approaching, and something shifted in his expression. "Thank you, Marshal, but I think I'm done with badges." Harlan followed Jonah's gaze to Ada and smiled knowingly. "Fair enough. Dry Creek's lucky to have you both." He tipped his hat and melted into the crowd. "Badge?" Ada asked. "Harlan wants me to join the Marshal's service. Says they need men who understand how Crow's kind operate." "It's good work. Important." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Jonah stepped closer, obvious to the crowd around them. "I've had enough of important work. I want something simpler, building instead of chasing, growing things instead of hunting men." "That sounds like hard work." "The best kind." His hand found hers. "Question is whether Dry Creek has room for a reformed gunman who's only good with horses and rifles." "Oh, I think we could find some use for you. There's a canyon full of good grays that needs clearing, wells to dig, maybe even a house to expand. If someone were planning to stay permanent-like. That someone would need a partner. Running water's tricky business." "So I hear." They stood there, grinning at each other like fools while the crowd swirled around them. Then someone, probably Missy, started clapping. Others joined in until the applause echoed off the courthouse walls. "Kiss her already," Thompson shouted, and the crowd laughed. Jonah glanced around, then shrugged. "Man's got a point." It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate and full of promises. All the fear and hope of the past weeks poured into a moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, Ada's cheeks were burning, but she didn't care. "So," she said breathlessly, "partners." "Partners," Jonah agreed. Later, there would be practical matters to sort. Crow's assets would be distributed among his victims, the water committee would be reformed with elected members, the railroad would still come, but on terms fair to all. But for now, Ada stood in the afternoon sun with Jonah's arm around her waist, watching as their friends and neighbors celebrated. Justice had come to Dry Creek at last, carried on the courage of ordinary people who'd refused to bow. "Your father would be proud," Jonah said quietly. "He would," Ada agreed. "But I think he'd also say the real work's just beginning." "Then we'd better get started." As the sun set behind the courthouse, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, Ada Hart knew he was right. There would be challenges ahead, struggles and setbacks, but they'd face them together, her and Jonah and all of Dry Creek. They'd won more than a trial today. They'd won the right to build their own future, one well and one hope at a time. The desert was still harsh, water still precious. But as Ada looked at the faces around her, determined, hopeful, Free, she knew they'd found something worth more than all Crow's stolen wealth. They'd found home. The flood had transformed Dry Creek into a town of mud and wreckage. 3 days after the trial's end, Ada stood knee-deep in muck, helping Sarah Martinez salvage what remained of the feed store. The irony wasn't lost on anyone they'd won justice in the courtroom, only to face nature's judgment back home. "At least the water's finally come," Thompson said, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. He'd been working since dawn, organizing crews to clear debris from the main street, even if it came all at once. Jonah waded past, carrying salvaged grain sacks to higher ground. He'd thrown himself into the recovery work with silent intensity, barely speaking since they'd returned to find a third of the town destroyed. Ada knew that look he was blaming himself somehow, carrying guilt for floods he couldn't have prevented. "Meeting at the church in an hour," Missy called out, picking her way through the ruins. "Pastor Ortega says we need to discuss relief distribution." The church had survived, sitting on higher ground, and had become the natural headquarters for recovery efforts. Ada made her way there as the sun climbed toward noon, her dress heavy with mud despite her best efforts. Inside, Pastor Ortega looked every one of his 60-odd years. He'd been going without sleep, coordinating shelter for displaced families, and it showed in the deep lines around his eyes. "Friends," he began when everyone had gathered, "we face challenges, but also opportunities. The federal government has seized Crow's assets, nearly $200,000 in cash and property. Judge Harlan has indicated these funds will be made available for community rebuilding." A stir ran through the crowd. That kind of money could transform Dry Creek, if used wisely. "There's more," the pastor continued. "The railroad company has agreed to honor fair prices for any land needed for their spur line. And with Ada's father's water maps, we can develop reliable sources for the entire valley." Pretty words. Walter Briggs spoke up from the back. He'd lost his barn in the flood and wasn't in a forgiving mood. "But half our fields are buried in silt. Wells are contaminated. Some folks are talking about pulling up stakes, starting over elsewhere." "Then we give them reason to stay," Ada said, standing. "Yes, we've been hit hard, but we've also been given a chance to build something better. Not Crow's town, built on fear and theft, but our town." "Easy for you to say," Briggs shot back. "Your place sits high. You didn't lose everything." "No, but I nearly lost my life fighting for this community. So did Jonah. So did everyone who stood up to Crow." She looked around the room, meeting eyes. "We can rebuild separately, each family for itself, or we can work together, pool resources, share labor, create something stronger than before." "The girl's right," Old Chen said unexpectedly. The Chinese families usually stayed quiet at town meetings, but the trial had changed things. "In my homeland, we have a saying, when the small fish swim together, they become a mighty dragon. Perhaps it's time Dry Creek learned to swim together." The discussion went on for hours. By the end, they'd formed committees, one for distributing Crow's seized assets, one for water development, one for negotiating with the railroad. Ada found herself elected to the water committee, despite her protests that she was too young. "Your father's daughter," Thompson said firmly. "That's qualification enough." As the meeting broke up, Pastor Ortega caught Ada's arm. A word, "child." They stepped into his small office, where he closed the door carefully. His expression was grave. "I had a visitor this morning, a woman named Margaret Morrison, Marshall Morrison's widow." Ada's breath caught. "She's here." "Arrived on the morning stage. She wants to meet the people who brought her husband's killers to justice. Specifically, she wants to meet Jonah." "He'll refuse. He still blames himself." "Which is why you must convince him. The woman needs this for her peace, and he needs it for his... Guilt is a poison. Ada, it needs to be drawn out before it festers." Ada found Jonah at the worksite, helping to dig a new channel for the creek that had jumped its banks. He was shirtless in the heat, his back scarred from old wounds and new. When he saw her approaching, something in her expression made him straighten. "What's wrong?" "Margaret Morrison is in town. She wants to meet you." The color drained from his face. "No. Jonah." "I said no." He turned back to his shovel, attacking the earth with renewed violence. "I failed to protect her husband, failed to prevent his death. What could I possibly say to her? The truth, that you tried, that you risked your life attempting to save his, and failed." The word came out harsh as gravel. "Jim Morrison is still dead. His children still fatherless, because I was too slow, too trusting, too human." Ada stepped closer, ignoring the mud. "You're not God. Jonah, you couldn't know Hollis would start shooting. You did everything you could." "It wasn't enough." "It never is. My father taught me that. You save who you can, mourn who you can't, and keep trying. That's all any of us can do." He stood silent, hands white-knuckled on the shovel handle. Around them, the work continued, people building, clearing, refusing to surrender to disaster. "She's at the hotel," Ada said softly. "Room 4. The choice is yours. But remember, this isn't just about your guilt. It's about her need to understand. To have someone acknowledge her loss, sometimes helping others heal, is how we heal ourselves." She left him there, knowing she'd pushed as far as she could. Some battles, people had to fight alone. The afternoon brought new challenges. The Santos family's temporary shelter had collapsed, and Ada helped organize materials for something sturdier. The town's only doctor was overwhelmed with flood-related injuries, so she found herself using her father's training, cleaning wounds and setting a broken arm. "You're good at this, Doctor," Holcomb said, watching her work. "Ever think about formal training? There's a medical college in San Francisco that's starting to accept women." "My place is here," Ada said automatically, then wondered if that was true. So much was changing, maybe her dreams could change too. As evening approached, she was heading home when she saw 2 figures in the cemetery. Jonah stood hat in hand beside a fresh grave marker they'd moved Morrison's body from Carson City for proper burial. Beside him, a woman in widow's black stood straight despite her grief. Ada couldn't hear their words, but she saw Margaret Morrison reach out and touch Jonah's arm, saw him bow his head, shoulders shaking. The widow said something else, then embraced him briefly before walking away. Jonah stayed by the grave as darkness fell. Ada waited at the cemetery gate, giving him time. When he finally emerged, his face was haggard, but something in his eyes had eased. "She thanked me," he said wonderingly. "Said Jim had written about me, about the work we were doing. Said he'd known the risks and chosen to come anyway. She said he would have been glad to know I survived." "He would have," Ada agreed. "She's staying in town. Wants to use part of the government compensation to start a school. Jim always valued education." She said. He smiled slightly. "Suggested you might help with it, having had such a learned father." "Maybe I will." They walked through the muddy streets, past houses being rebuilt and new foundations being laid. The sound of hammers continued even in the growing darkness. Dry Creek refusing to surrender to night or nature. I've been thinking," Jonah said, "about staying, about building, but I need you to know something first." Ada's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Tell me." "The war broke something in me. Maybe it was broken before, and the war just showed it clear. I've done necessary things, but terrible too. Following orders that got men killed, staying quiet when I should have spoken. The ghosts don't leave easy." "I know," Ada said simply. "I've seen you fight them at night, heard you call out names of the dead." He stopped walking, stared at her. "And you still want you to stay, still trust you, still love you." The last words slipped out unbidden, but she didn't take them back. "Yes, to all of it." "Ada." "No, let me finish." You think you're broken. We're all broken somehow. This whole town is broken, built on stolen land, sustained by greed, nearly destroyed by one man's ambition. But we're rebuilding anyway, making something new from the pieces. That's what people do. And if the ghosts come back, if I fail you like I failed Jim, then we'll face that together too. That's what partners do. He was quiet for so long she thought she'd pushed too hard. Then he reached out, traced her cheek with one calloused finger. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Good thing I'm not asking what you deserve. I'm asking what you choose. I choose you, he said simply. I choose this place. I choose to try. It wasn't the passionate declaration from the courthouse steps. It was quieter, more real, weighted with understanding of what they were promising. Ada preferred it that way. They were interrupted by running feet. Miguel Santos came skidding around the corner, face flushed with excitement. Miss Hart, mister. Cade, you need to come quick. They found something while digging the new well, you won't believe it. They followed him to the work site where a crowd had gathered. Thompson stood at the edge of a deep hole, holding a lantern. His face was strange in the flickering light. What is it? Ada called. See for yourself. She peered down and gasped. At the bottom of the excavation, water seeped from the walls, but that wasn't what caught her attention. The water ran over something that gleamed in the lantern light, bedrock veined with white quartz, and in the quartz, gold, someone whispered. It's gold. Not much, from what Ada could see. Not a fortune like the silver strikes that had built and broken so many towns, but maybe enough to help rebuild, enough to give people hope. Your father was looking for water, Thompson said to Ada. Looks like he found more than that. What do we do? Miguel asked. If word gets out, we'll have another rush. Strangers flooding in, tearing up the land. Ada looked around at the faces her neighbors, her friends, her community. People who'd fought together, survived together, chosen to build together. We do what we've been doing, she said. We work together, file the claim in the town's name, use the profits for everyone, and we keep it quiet until we're ready. Can we do that? Someone asked. Legal-like? With the right lawyer, anything's legal, Jonah said dryly. And I happen to know Margaret Morrison's brother is one of the best in California. Bet he'd be interested in helping the town that brought his brother-in-law's killers to justice. The crowd murmured approval. As they dispersed, making plans and swearing each other to secrecy. Ada felt a strange lightness. It wasn't the gold that mattered, it was the choosing. The decision to share rather than grab. To build together rather than tear apart. Your father would have loved this, Jonah said. Finding gold while looking for water. There's a lesson in that somewhere. The lesson, Pastor Ortega said, appearing beside them with his usual quiet timing, is that sometimes we find blessings we weren't looking for. Sometimes the very thing that seems like destruction, a flood, a trial, a loss clears the ground for something new to grow. He looked tired, but peaceful, this man who'd helped hold the town together through its darkest time. Speaking of growing things, he continued with a slight smile. I'll be needing help with services while we rebuild the church. Perhaps a younger voice to share the load. I don't suppose either of you. I'm no preacher, Jonah said quickly. Neither was I. Once, just a farmer who felt called to serve. Callings come in many forms. Mr. Cade, teaching, healing, protecting, building all our ways of serving. He patted Jonah's shoulder. Think about it. The town will need many kinds of leaders in the days ahead. He wandered off, leaving them standing by the gold-laced well. Around them, Dry Creek continued its transformation, no longer Crow's Kingdom or a failing mining town, but something new, something chosen. Home, Ada said softly, testing the word. Home, Jonah agreed, and took her muddy hand in his. Above them, stars began to appear in the desert sky. The same stars that had watched over struggle and loss, that would watch over whatever came next. But for now, For this moment, Ada was content to stand in the ruins that would become foundations, holding the hand of a man who'd chosen to stay, surrounded by people who'd chosen to fight for each other. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The morning sun painted the valley gold as Ada stood before the completed water channel, watching clear water flow toward the new irrigation ditches. 6 months had passed since the flood, since the trial, since that night by the well when they'd found hope gleaming in quartz. The transformation was remarkable where drought-stricken land had been. Green shoots now pushed through rich soil. Pressures holding steady. Jonah called from the pump house. He'd thrown himself into learning the mechanics of water management with the same intensity he'd once tracked outlaws. Should reach the Martinez fields by noon. The railroad representatives were due that afternoon to finalize the agreement for the water station. Ada had spent weeks negotiating, using her father's maps and the town's newfound unity as leverage. The deal would bring steady income to Dry Creek while preserving their control over the water rights. "You ready for this?" Missy asked, approaching with a ledger under her arm. As secretary of the water cooperative, she'd become Ada's right hand in managing the complex agreements. "Ready as I'll ever be." Ada smoothed her new dress, nothing fancy, but clean and professional. The town had elected her to lead the negotiations, despite her protests about age and inexperience. "You're Doc Hart's daughter," Thompson had said. "You've got his brains and more backbone than most men. You'll do fine." The church bell rang, calling people to witness the signing. As Ada walked toward town, she could see the changes everywhere. New buildings rising where old ones had burned. The Santos family's restaurant, serving Mexican food that had the whole valley talking. Margaret Morrison's school, where children of all backgrounds learned together. The medical clinic where Dr. Holcomb now had 2 assistants, one of them Ada herself, studying whenever she could spare time from water management. The meeting was held in the new town hall, built with some of Crow's seized assets. The railroad men, Mr. Davidson and Mr. Pierce, were already there, looking slightly uncomfortable in the room full of townspeople. "Miss Hart." Davidson stood as she entered. "Are you ready to proceed?" "We are." Ada took her seat at the head of the table, Jonah and Missy flanking her. "But first, I believe you had some concerns about the water quality." "Yes, we need assurances that the supply will meet our standards for locomotive use." Ada produced the water analysis reports, performed by a chemist from Carson City. "As you can see, our water exceeds all requirements. The aquifer my father discovered is remarkably pure." The negotiations proceeded smoothly. The railroad would pay fair market rates, employ local workers for construction and maintenance, and respect the town's authority over water distribution. In return, Dry Creek would guarantee reliable supply and priority service. "There's one more matter," Pierce said as they prepared to sign. "We've heard rumors about a gold strike. The company needs to know if this will affect our agreement." A murmur ran through the crowd. The gold discovery had been kept quiet, but secrets have a way of leaking out. "The mineral rights belong to the town collectively," Ada said calmly. "Any extraction is being managed carefully to avoid disrupting water sources. The gold is modest, enough to help with civic improvements, not enough to cause a rush. Our focus remains on sustainable development agriculture, ranching, and yes, serving the railroad's needs." Davidson and Pierce exchanged glances, then nodded. "That's actually preferable. Gold towns tend to be unstable. We need reliability." As Ada signed her name to the agreement, she thought of her father. He'd dreamed of bringing life to the desert through water. Now that dream was becoming reality, though in ways he'd never imagined. After the railroad men departed, the real celebration began. Tables were set up in the square, families contributing food for a community feast. Ada found herself pulled into the Mexican dance Miguel and his cousins were demonstrating, laughing as she tried to follow the steps. "You're terrible at this," Jonah said, catching her as she stumbled. "Can't be good at everything," she replied, breathless. Besides, when did you learn to dance? Man of many talents. He spun her expertly, and she realized he wasn't joking. Picked it up in Texas, before the war. Another lifetime. Not another lifetime, just another chapter. She let him lead her through the steps, aware of people watching and not caring. Let them see. After everything they'd been through, she was done hiding how she felt. As evening approached, Pastor Ortega called for attention. He looked healthier than he had during the dark days of Crow's reign. The burden of leading the resistance shared now among many shoulders. Friends, he began. We gather to celebrate not just a business agreement, but a resurrection. This town died when greed took hold. It has been reborn through sacrifice, courage, and most importantly, through choosing to stand together. Here, here, voices called out. But we must remember, the pastor's voice grew serious. What we've built remains fragile. There will be other Crows, other challenges. The railroad brings opportunity, but also change. New people will come, bringing new ideas, new conflicts. The true test is not surviving the crisis, but building something that lasts. Then we'd better build it strong. Thompson called out, starting with that new blacksmith shop. Jonah, you ready to start your apprenticeship Monday? Ada looked at Jonah in surprise. He hadn't mentioned this. Figured I should learn a trade, he said quietly. Gunwork's not much use in a peaceful town. Peaceful might be optimistic, Ada said, but I like the ambition. As the party continued, she slipped away to the cemetery. 2 graves drew her father's, and beside it, a newer stone for Marshall Morrison. Margaret had insisted he be buried here, where his work had finally borne fruit. We did it, Papa, she said softly. Not the way you imagined. Maybe, but the water flows, the town thrives, and people are building instead of taking. I think you'd approve. Footsteps crunched behind her. Jonah appeared, carrying 2 cups of cider. Thought you might be here. He handed her a cup. Margaret asked me to check the stone, make sure it's holding up. She's staying then for certain. Says the school needs her. Truth is, I think she needs the school, needs to build something from the loss. They stood quietly, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sounds of celebration drifted from the town square. Laughter, music, life going on. I've been thinking, Ada said, about the future. The water cooperative's running well. The railroad deal is set. Maybe it's time I focused more on the medical work. Doctor, Holcomb says there's real need, especially with the town growing. Following in your father's footsteps. In my own way, he was a healer. I'm more practical. But there's satisfaction in it, helping people directly instead of through committees and contracts. What about San Francisco, that medical college? Ada considered. Maybe someday, but not yet. This place still needs me, needs us. Us. Jonah tested the word. I like the sound of that. Speaking of us. Ada set down her cup, suddenly nervous. People are talking, saying it's not proper. Us working so close together when there's no formal agreement, Jonah supplied. Amused. Like the railroad contract, party of the first part agrees to provide affection and support to party of the second part. I'm being serious. So am I. He set his own cup aside, took her hands. Ada Hart, you saved my life, gave me purpose, and showed me how to build instead of destroy. I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd have me, but I figured you'd want to do things in your own time, your own way. And if my way is sooner rather than later, his hands tightened on hers, then name the day. How about when the spur line's complete? Give us time to finish the water system, get the school properly running, do things right. Spring, then, when things are growing. He pulled her close. I can wait. Been waiting my whole life for you, even when I didn't know it. They walked back to the celebration hand in hand, no longer concerned about whispers. The announcement of their engagement was met with cheers and good-natured ribbing. Missy immediately began planning, while Thompson gruffly offered to make the rings in his forge. "About time," Margaret Morrison said, embracing Ada. Jim would have been pleased. He always said the best partnerships were built on shared purpose. As the evening wore on, Ada found herself on the new water company office porch, watching the town she'd fought for continue its celebration. Jonah sat beside her on the bench they'd installed the same wagon seat from that desperate night fleeing through the storm, now repurposed as something peaceful. "No regrets?" he asked. "None. You?" "Only that it took so long to find where I belonged." The stars were coming out, brilliant in the clear desert air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, disputes over water shares to mediate, medical calls to answer, a town to help guide through change. But tonight, there was peace. "My father used to say that water always finds its level." Ada mused. "No matter the obstacles, it keeps flowing until it reaches where it needs to be. Like us. Like all of it, the town, the people, everything. We went through flood and fire, greed and violence, but we found our level." "From the square." Miguel's voice rose in song, something in Spanish about rivers and hope. Other voices joined in, a mixture of languages and accents that somehow harmonized. "That's the future," Jonah said quietly. "All of us flowing together." Ada thought of Crow in his prison cell, of all he'd tried to steal and control. He'd seen the desert as something to be conquered, water as a commodity to be hoarded. He'd never understood what her father knew, that water shared multiplies blessing, while water hoarded turns poison. "The real gold," she said, "was never in the ground. It was in choosing to share what we found." "Philosophy. Now you have been spending too much time with the pastor." "Maybe, but I'm right." "Yes," he agreed, drawing her close. "You are." As the celebration finally wound down, families departing with sleepy children and full hearts, Ada looked out over Dry Creek one last time. Street lamps glowed where darkness had reigned. Gardens flourished where dust had ruled. Most importantly, people walked freely where fear had once stalked. It wasn't perfect. There were still empty lots where buildings had burned. Still grief for those lost along the way. But it was theirs, built by their hands and choices, sustained by their courage and compassion. "Home," she said, the word no longer a question but a certainty. "Home," Jonah agreed, and helped her to her feet. They walked together through streets they'd fought to save, past the water that would sustain generations, toward the small house where their future waited to be built. Behind them, the last lanterns were being extinguished in the square. Ahead, the desert stretched endless under stars. But here, in this place they'd claimed through struggle and sacrifice, light endured, water flowed, love grew, and Dry Creek, against all odds, bloomed. The wagon wood bench would remain on that porch for decades to come, worn smooth by countless sittings, witness to proposals and arguments, celebrations and sorrows. Children would play on it, including a dark-haired girl named Faith who had her mother's determination and her father's steady hands. Travelers would rest on it, hearing the story of how a town chose cooperation over competition, how water meant for a few became life for many. And always, carved small in one corner where Ada had marked it one quiet evening, were the words that captured everything. "Here we chose to stay." In the end, that was the true victory. Not the trial won or the gold found or the railroad tamed, but the choosing to fight, to build, to trust, to love. The choice to make a stand in an unlikely place with unlikely people and say, "This is home. This is worth everything. This is ours." The desert wind sang through the valley, no longer threatening but promising. Rain would come again, and drought. Challenges would rise like dust devils. spinning through their carefully ordered lives. But Dry Creek would endure, rooted deep in the aquifer of community, blooming perpetually in the most unlikely ground. All because once, in a time of testing, they had pressed together in the wagon wood of hardship and whispered the only words that mattered. We'll stay, we'll fight, we'll build. And they did. Thank you for listening to this story from the American frontier. I'm curious to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles and share our thoughts about Ada and Jonah's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, love, and justice in the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the human spirit triumphing against all odds. Until our next adventure in the wild frontier, keep riding toward your own horizons.